بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين وخاتم النبيين محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. أما بعد, respected listeners, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Yesterday we finished speaking about Surah Bani Israel. Today we move on to Surah Kahf. In hadith, the Prophet ﷺ says that one who recites the first and last verses of Surah Kahf, then for him there will be a light from his feet up to his head, and the one who recites the whole surah, then for him there is a light from the earth up to the sky. Surah Kahf is a Meccan surah, and there are many merits and virtues for this surah. In another hadith we learn that he who memorizes the first 10 verses of Surah Al-Kahf will remain protected from the ill effects of Dajjal. And in another hadith we also learn the same about one who memorizes the final 10 verses of Surah Al-Kahf. In another hadith we learn that one who recites Surah Al-Kahf on the day of Jumu'ah will have a light from his feet up to the sky, and this light will serve him well on the day of judgment. And also every sin committed by him between the past and the present Jumu'ah will be forgiven. And we learn from another hadith also that if Dajjal appears, then he will stay safe against the trying challenges released by Dajjal as well. So the Prophet ﷺ has encouraged the recitation of Surah Al-Kahf on Yawm al-Jumu'ah. We learn from another hadith that the Prophet ﷺ said that the entire Surah Al-Kahf was revealed at one time, and 70,000 angels came down with it. Now, the reason behind the revelation of Surah Al-Kahf is that the Quraysh of Mecca, again, they were constantly looking for flaws in the message of the Prophet ﷺ. And that's what at the beginning of the surah Allah says, وَلَمْ يَجْعَلْ لَهُ عِوَجًا, and there is no crookedness in it. But they would always look for errors and faults with the Prophet ﷺ. Now, being polytheists, they didn't have a history of religion, of prophets, of divine books or anything like that. So they would often approach the Jews of Medina because they had a history of religion and so on. So they sent two men, Nadr ibn Harith and Uqbat ibn Abi Mu'ayt, to the Jewish scholars of Medina, and they asked them, they wanted to know that, is anything mentioned about this prophet in the scriptures of the Torah and the Injil? Now, the scholars said to them, look, ask him 3 questions, and if he is able to answer these correctly, then know that he is a prophet and a messenger of God. But if he fails to do that, then he's just pretending and he's an imposter. So ask him about the young men who had left their city in the past and what happened to them. Also ask him about the man who travelled the east and the west of the earth and what happened to him. And thirdly, ask him about the ruh, about the spirit, and what this is. So these two, Nadr ibn Harith and Uqbat ibn Abi Mu'ayt, they returned to Mecca and they informed their friends that this is what happened. So then they took the questions to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that, look, come to me tomorrow and I'll answer the questions. Now the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam didn't say that I'll answer them tomorrow, inshallah. He just said I'll answer them tomorrow. Inshallah, meaning if Allah wills. Anyway, when they came back to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was waiting for wahi, but wahi didn't come. The next day it didn't come. The day after it didn't come. In fact, for 15 days, no wahi came. And the Quraysh of Makkah began taunting and teasing the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which caused him great pain. After 15 days, Sayyidina Jibreel alayhi salatu wasalam came with Surah Kahf. And within the surah, Allah also mentions this point, and He clarifies why, Allah mentions why the wahi hadn't come in all these days, was because the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam hadn't mentioned or hadn't said by the will of Allah, and said that I will answer you tomorrow. So Allah addresses this by saying, وَلَا تَقُولَنَّ لِشَيْءٍ إِنِّي فَاعِلٌ ذَلِكَ غَدًا إِلَّا إِن يَشَاءَ اللَّهُ. And do not say regarding anything that I will do this tomorrow, إِلَّا إِن يَشَاءَ اللَّهُ, except that Allah wills. Meaning, always condition it with the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, Surah Al-Kahf was revealed, and in Surah Al-Kahf, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about the young men who left their city. He also speaks about the man who traveled the east and the west, and mention about the ruh. Allah doesn't go into any detail. In fact, at the end of Surah Bani Israel, Allah already mentioned this. And Allah mentions that وَيَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الرُّوحِ, that they ask you regarding the spirit, قُلِ الرُّوحُ مِنْ أَمْرِ رَبِّي, that the ruh is from the matters of my Lord. And وَمَا أُوتِيتُم مِّنَ الْعِلْمِ إِلَّا قَلِيلًا, and you have not been given knowledge except little. So Allah doesn't go into detail about the ruh. And there was no purpose and no reason to do so. The people of the young men that they refer to, who left their city, these are who we know as the Ashab al-Kahf, the people of the cave. And in relation to the man who travelled from the east to the west, who they were referring to, this was Dhul Qarnayn. And we'll speak about each of these. Now, the word Kahf is a large mountainous cave. The difference being that if it was a small cave, it'd be known as a ghar, like the Prophet ﷺ would go to Ghar Thawr or Ghar Hira. But a kahf is larger than that. Now, a point to note is that Allah says, أَمْ حَسِبْتَ أَنَّ أَصْحَابَ الْكَهْفِ وَالرَّقِيمِ كَانُوا مِنْ آيَاتِنَا عَجَبًا, that do you think that the people of the kahf, mean the cave, and raqim, were unusual out of our signs? Now, the ulama differ and have spoken and have written different things about the word Kahf and Raqim, that the people of Kahf and the people of Raqim. Now, are there two groups, different groups mentioned here, or are these the one and the same group? Raqim meaning the inscription. And many of the ulama say that this refers to actually the same group of young men. And one of the reasons why Raqim is mentioned, because their names were inscribed onto a rock, and that's what they're referred to as Raqim. Now, according to different narrations, and there's much to think about and much to talk about when it comes to the people of the cave, the Ashab al-Kahf. There are questions here as well in the Quran that Allah addresses, like for example, the people differed in relation to how many of them there were. And then there are discussions amongst the ulama about where this cave is, where these people were from, what period was this from. So, and then other questions such as, are they still alive, and so on. How many years did they sleep for? That's mentioned in the Quran, but again, there's many points here. The Quran and the Ahadith don't go into detail about many of these different points. But now, obviously, we live in a time where people are mesmerized and admire facts and data so much. So, for this purpose, the ulama have tried to determine where, when, and so on. But this isn't the time to go through all of these. Suffice to say that have been suggestions that these people were, some suggestions suggest Syria, others Spain, Granada in Spain, and so on. When, according to some, this happened shortly after the time of Sayyidina Isa alayhi salatu wassalam. Now the Ashab al-Kahf, they were the progeny of kings and leaders, and their people were idol worshippers. Now, I'll just go through the story very quickly. And again, the story has been mentioned in Surah Al-Kahf in different ways, different parts, but I'll just go through the story rather than translating the verses. Their people were idol worshippers. Now, one day, their people went out of town to participate in one of their religious festivals. And they would do this every year, and then they would go and worship their idols and sacrifice the animals to please them. And their king was a zalim, was a tyrant. His name was, according to some narrations, Daqyanus. Now, he used to force people to worship idols. Now, on this particular year, these young men, who later became identified as the Ashab al-Kahf, they also went with their people, but they couldn't understand why their people would worship idols which they had crafted out of their own hands. Now we learn that this thought crossed the minds of a few young men, and they started to move away from where their people were worshipping. And the first man, for example, he went and he sat down alone under a tree. Again, contemplating and thinking, what are these people doing? And after that, another one came, then a few of them gathered. But none of them were familiar or knew why each other had come and sat down here away from the rest of the group. Now, it was obviously the divine will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that they should all come together. They were concealing their beliefs from one another, lest they get reported to the king and suffer a punishment as a result. Then, after a short while, one of them spoke out and said, look, all of us are here while everybody else is enjoying themselves. I think it's important that we get to know what we're thinking. Why are we here? So then one of them spoke out and he said, look, the worship of these idols that our people are doing is false. Everybody should be worshipping one Allah, and He has no partners. And He's the creator of this universe. So this kind of made it easy, and the others, they all spoke out and said, this is why we've come here too. So then they decided that so they allocated a house where they would worship together. They would worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone, together. And however, the people of the city found out, and word got to the king. So the king summoned them, and rather than them becoming fearful, they actually called him towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, he became very angry and said that, look, I'm going to give you some time to think over this. And if you don't leave and abandon this new thing that you've come up with, then you'll be punished. Now, the king also had all of their princely robes removed. Because remember, they were of the progeny of chiefs and kings and so on. Now, because he had given them some respite, they decided that there's no way that we can get away with this, so they decided to flee. And they fled the city. After fleeing the city, they took refuge in a cave, and inside there they fell asleep. And they had their dog follow them, who stood guard at the mouth of the cave. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions how, for example, the sunlight wouldn't affect them. If somebody was passing by and was to see them, they would have thought that they were alive. And these points are mentioned in the Quran here. Allah caused them to sleep for 309 years. And again, this is mentioned in the Quran as well. After 309 years, they awoke, and they weren't aware that they had slept for this long. They thought they just slept for a day or so. So then they were hungry, so they needed food. So they sent one of them to go to the market and go and get some food. And they asked him to go very secretly, because obviously they were wanted. Now, according to some narrations, we learn that this man's name was Tamliha. He went. Now, when he went, what happened in the meantime over that period of 309 years? That tyrant king had obviously died, and the people had rejected the idols, and they had changed their ways. And there was a new king now by the name of Baydudis, and he was a righteous man. Now, he himself was actually going through some difficulties, because during that time there was a question arose about how after we are dead, how can people be brought back to life again? So he was embroiled in this and worried about how he can explain to the people and convince them that this is true. But then he couldn't find any way to convince them. So then, according to narrations, we learned that he wore rags, and then he covered himself in ash, and he sat down and said, I'm not going to get up until some solution is found. Now, in this time, Tamliha, he left the cave and he went to obtain some food. Now, when he went to the market, he purchased some food, and when he gave them the money, the shopkeeper said, well, this currency we don't recognize. So then they asked him that, where did this coin come from? And he was confused also. So they showed it to one another, and then they thought that this may be some treasure that this man has got hold of. So, but Tamliha was obviously denying it. So then they detained him and produced him before the king. Now, this king was a righteous man, and he was aware of the state's treasures, and there was a tablet on which there was inscribed the list of the names of the people of Kahf, because for them they were heroes, because these are the people who objected to an idol-worshipping king and for their deen. So these were very important people for them. So do this, he realized that this was one of those people, one of the young men who had fled the city. So he was very happy, and obviously this also solved his problem. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can cause a group of people to sleep for this long, then bring them back to a state of being awake after so long, then why can he not raise the dead after their bones have perished? So then he spoke to Tamliha, and then he was convinced that this was one of those young men. So then he asked Tamliha to let me go and see the rest of you. So according to some narrations, he went, and then Tamliha told his friends that, look, the king is here, and he related to them what had happened. And according to some narrations, he went to see them, and according to some narrations, the king couldn't see them. Whatever the case, after this, Allah sent death and they passed away. So this is what's mentioned in the Quran hadith in relation to the people of the cave. Everything else that we learn from the books of history and so on, these are based on the researches of the ulama and historians. But again, the ulama have differed in so many different things in relation to the people of the cave. So that's one of the key stories of Surah Al-Kahf. There are actually four main stories in Surah Al-Kahf. One is the people of the cave. The other is a story of two friends, one who was very wealthy, and Allah speaks about how he boasted to his friend about his wealth. So that's mentioned here in the surah. Also the story of Sayyidina Musa alayhi salatu wasalam and his encounter with Sayyidina Khadir alayhi salatu wasalam. And finally the story of Dhul Qarnayn. Now, after the story of the people of the cave, Allah mentions, before he moves on to speaking about the two friends, Allah says, وَاصْبِرْ نَفْسَكَ مَعَ الَّذِينَ يَدْعُونَ رَبَّهُمْ بِالْغَدَاةِ وَالْعَشِيِّ يُرِيدُونَ وَجْهَهُ وَلَا تَعْدُ عَيْنَاكَ عَنْهُمْ تُرِيدُ زِينَةَ الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا وَلَا تُطِعْ مَنْ أَغْفَلْنَا قَلْبَهُ عَنْ ذِكْرِنَا وَاتَّبَعَ هَوَاهُ وَكَانَ أَمْرُهُ فُرُطًا. And keep yourself content with those who call their Lord morning and evening, seeking his pleasure. And do not let your eyes overlook them, seeking the splendor of this worldly life. And do not obey the one whose hearts we have made neglectful or heedless of our remembrance, and one who has followed his desire and whose behavior has exceeded the limits. Now what happened was, Uyaynah ibn Hisn was one of the chiefs of Mecca. Now he once visited the Prophet ﷺ, and Sayyidina Salman al-Farisi radiyallahu anhu was one of the poor Sahaba radiyallahu anhum. His clothes were tattered, and he was there sitting next to the Prophet ﷺ. There were some others as well, poor, humble Sahaba radiyallahu anhum. So Uyaynah then said that these are the people, he said to the Prophet ﷺ that these are the people who stop us from coming to you and listening to you. And we can't sit with these people. Remove them from your gathering, or have a separate gathering for us. And according to another narration, we learn that Umayyah ibn Khalaf, and he advised the Prophet ﷺ also that don't have these broken down, poor Muslims near you. Have the chiefs of Mecca with you, and then if they embrace, then it will advance your religion, because these people are seen as important. But then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed these verses that no, and again similar verses we've come across before, that no matter, even if even if there's a possibility that these people there, they may listen, but don't abandon these poor Sahaba radiallahu anhum, who truly, for the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they call out to him morning and evening. And as for these lot, what do you know, and what does it matter to you whether they believe or not? In fact, all they are after is their worldly pleasures. Then, after mentioning that, Allah speaks about to these two friends. And why? Because Allah mentions, just as the Quraysh of Makkah, where they thought that their wealth and their prestige was more important than the actions and deeds of these poor people, the same way this story as well about this man who was wealthy, and he felt that his wealth gained him a status in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah says, and give them an example. وَضْرِبْ لَهُمْ مَثَلًا رَجُلَيْنِ, the two men, we gave one of them 2 gardens of grapes, and we surrounded them both with date palms, and placed tillage between them. Both the gardens brought forth their fruit and didn't reduce anything from it, and we caused a stream to flow through them. I'll just translate this actually. So he had wealth, so he said to his companion while speaking to him, that I am greater than you in wealth and stronger in manpower. And then Allah speaks about how he entered his garden while he was unjust to himself, and he said, I do not think that this will ever perish, and I do not think that the hour is to come, and even if I am sent back to my Lord, I will surely find a better place than this to return to. So, first of all, when he enters into his garden with his friend, he's first arrogant and proud, that look what I have. But then this arrogance and pride, it propels him into disbelief. So then he starts to doubt and reject the coming of the final hour. And then he goes even further in his rebellion against Allah by saying that, you know what, this won't perish, and even if it does, and even if I am returned to my Lord, I'll get better than this. So his companion, he responded by saying that, do you disbelieve in He who created you from dust, then a drop, and He fashioned you into a human being? As for me, I believe that Allah is my Lord, and I do not associate anyone with my Lord. And why is it that when you entered your garden, you didn't say, meaning, what did you say? You said that, look at all of this. You should have said that everything is as Allah wills. There is no power except with Allah. If you see me less than you in wealth and children, then I hope my Lord will give me better than your garden and send to yours, meaning this land, a punishment from the heavens, and it becomes a barren land. And then he went on, talking about how Allah could destroy all of this. Now, is there anything wrong with having wealth? No, there isn't. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blesses somebody, then that is Allah's blessings. Allah says in the Quran, هَذَا مِنْ فَضْلِ رَبِّي. Sayyidina Sulaiman alayhi salatu wasalam, when he was blessed, he said, this is of the blessings and virtue of my Lord. But why does Allah give me wealth? لِيَبْلُوَنِي أَشْكُرَ أَمْ أَكْفُرُ, so that He may test me to see if I am grateful or if I disbelieve or ungrateful. And even though wealth is permissible and a person can amass wealth, but as long as that person gives their due, and as long as that person's wealth doesn't cause them to become arrogant, wealth in itself, when we say zakah purifies wealth, wealth is such that it makes a person haughty and proud. It's just a natural quality. But a person who has wealth and then on top of that has humility and understands Allah's right over them in that wealth, and they give their due, then that person's wealth is blessed. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala instructs the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam to give them the parable of the worldly life. And some examples are given here of how the worldly life is temporary. Then some scenes of the Day of Judgment are mentioned. Then the story of Sayyidina Adam alayhi salatu wasalam is mentioned, and when Allah instructed the angels to prostrate before Sayyidina Adam alayhi salatu wasalam. And then the story of Sayyidina Musa alayhi salatu wasalam is mentioned. And this begins from where Allah says, وَإِذْ قَالَ مُوسَى لِفْتَاحُ لَا أَبْرَحُ حَتَّى أَبْلُغَ مَجْمَعَ الْبَحْرَيْنِ أَوْ أَمْضِيَ حُقْبًا. And when Musa alayhi salatu wasalam said to his servant, or to his young man, that I shall not give up until I reach the meeting point of the two seas, or I will carry on for years. Now, this has been mentioned, this story has been mentioned in the books of hadith in some detail. Imam Bukhari narrates this as well in his Sahih. What happened was, once Sayyidina Musa alayhi salatu wasalam was speaking to his people, and then a man from Banu Israel asked Sayyidina Musa alayhi salatu wasalam, "O Musa, who is the most knowledgeable?" So Musa alayhi salatu wasalam, being the prophets of Allah, he was the most knowledgeable, so he said, "I am." But then Allah wanted to teach Musa alayhi salatu wasalam that he should have said that Allah knows best who is the most knowledgeable. So Allah said to Musa alayhi salatu wasalam that, "O Musa, we have a servant of ours who has more knowledge than you." Now, Musa alayhi salatu wasalam didn't turn around and say, "Well, what did you make me a prophet for? If there's somebody else that's more knowledgeable, if I'm the prophet of the people, I should have the most knowledge." No, immediately his response was that, "Oh Allah, how can I go to this person and learn from him?" So then Allah instructed him to take a journey, and with him take a basket within which there would be a fish, and it was to travel in the direction of the meeting point of the two seas. And then he instructed Musa alayhi salatu wasalam, when you reach this place where the fish disappears, then that shall be the place where you'll meet this servant of ours. So Musa alayhi salatu wasalam, he travelled with his servant, or with his disciple Sayyidina Yusha ibn Nun. According to some narrations, we know that this was Yusha ibn Nun, the son of Ephraim, the son of Yusuf alayhi salatu wasalam. So he was the grandson of Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salatu wasalam. And if you remember when we spoke about the story of when the people of Banu Israel with Musa alayhi salatu wasalam, they travelled and to reclaim their homeland, and Allah instructed them to enter into the city, and they said, "No, there are mighty people there, and we shall not fight there until they come out." This was the same story in which they said that فَذْهَبْ أَنْتَ وَرَبُّكَ فَقَاتِلَا إِنَّا هَاهُنَا قَاعِدُونَ, that you go, you and your Lord go and fight, we are seated here. And then there were two men from Banu Israel who tried to reason and explain to their people that, look, listen to this prophet. His commandments are from Allah. He's promised you victory, so listen to him. So one of these two men was Sayyidina Yusha ibn Nun. So in any case, they travelled towards this direction. At one point, Sayyidina Musa alayhi salatu wasalam, he fell asleep. And then whilst he was asleep, the fish that was in this basket, it jumped out of the basket and it dived into the river. And Yusha ibn Nun, into the sea. And Yusha ibn Nun, he speaks about how it was a miraculous feat that an almost tunnel-like tunnel appeared in the water and the fish went right through it. So he was amazed at this. In any case, after a short while, Sayyidina Musa alayhi salatu wasalam woke up and they carried on their journey. Yusha ibn Nun forgot to mention to Sayyidina Musa alayhi salatu wasalam what had happened. When they'd carried on travelling, they'd reached a good distance. Sayyidina Musa alayhi salatu wasalam said to Yusha ibn Nun that take out some food, we're hungry, we want to eat. So then Yusha ibn Nun, he remembered and he said, oh, when you were resting, this happened. So then Musa alayhi salatu wasalam said, that was where we were going to meet this servant of Allah. So then they retraced their steps and they came back. And when they got to that place, they found a man who was covered in a sheet from his head to his feet. So then Musa alayhi salatu wasalam said, he gave him salam. This man turned around, Khidr alayhi salatu wasalam. Khidr, there's different ways of pronouncing his name. So he said, Anna bi ardika salam. You're saying peace, meaning salam alaykum. Anna bi ardika salam. Where is there peace in this land of yours? So then he said, I am Musa. So he said, you're Musa banu Israel? He said, yes. This is what you want. So he said, I know that you have some knowledge and I want to accompany you and stay in your company to learn of you. So then Khidr alayhi salatu wasalam said to Sayyidina Musa alayhi salatu wasalam, Musa, you have knowledge that I am not aware of and I have knowledge that you cannot comprehend. And if you were to spend time with me, you wouldn't be able to stay patient. So Musa alayhi salatu wasalam, he requested that, let me please, I want to learn from you. Now imagine, this is, again, this knowledge that, nowadays we have knowledge at our fingertips. Anything we want, go onto the internet, search for it, we'll find it. And in fact, compared to the people of the past, access to information has never been like it is now. Whenever we want anything, we'll find it on the internet. But then, can anyone say that people are knowledgeable or have ilm, meaning that which they practice or that which benefits them? So the difference is that we have information, we don't have knowledge. And knowledge is that which, even in the instance of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when Sayyidina Jibreel alayhi salatu wasalam, when he taught him the first verses of the Quran, and we learn from that Sayyidina Jibreel alayhi salatu wasalam, he hugged the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam to symbolize the transferring of knowledge between the hearts of Jibreel alayhi salatu wasalam to the heart of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And this is how knowledge was passed down. That it was a relationship between teachers and students, and students would sacrifice so much to learn from their teachers. They would go into the service of their teachers just to learn a few ahadith. And we learn about how ulama, not just the ulama, the Sahaba radiyallahu anhum, how they strive to learn. Sayyidina Abu Ayyub al-Ansari radiyallahu anhu, he travelled from Medina to Egypt just to hear one hadith. And this wasn't a hadith that he didn't know. It was a hadith that he knew. But he had also heard that there was somebody else who had also heard this hadith. So he travelled all this distance just to hear that hadith from him. And after he heard the hadith, he didn't even dismount. He turned around and travelled back to Medina. A famous story of Sayyidina Abu Darda radiyallahu anhu, by that person who travelled all the way to Dimashq to learn one hadith. So, knowledge is something that the ulama and people of the past, they strive for. And this is what Sayyidina Musa alayhi salatu wasalam, he had to undergo so much that he had to travel so much. And even when he reached that place where he would find Khidr alayhi salatu wasalam, Allah wanted it to be such that Allah wanted him to strive even more. So they went past that place and they traveled for about another day or so. And then they realized that, wait, we should have stopped over there, because where the fish disappeared was where we were going to find this servant of Allah. So then they had to retrace their steps and travel back, and then only did he find Khidr. But then even when he found Khidr alayhi salatu wasalam, it wasn't just a matter of, okay, I'm going with you. He had to literally beg him that, can I please accompany you to learn of you? So then Khidr alayhi salatu wasalam, even him, he put conditions to Sayyidina Musa alayhi salatu wasalam. He said, the only way I will let you travel with me is if you promise not to interfere. And Musa alayhi salatu wasalam, he wasn't just any prophet, he was from the Ulul Azm, the prophets of resolve. And he had to agree to these stringent conditions laid down by Khidr alayhi salatu wasalam in order just to learn. So Khidr alayhi salatu wasalam, he agreed. So they started walking by the shore. There came a boat, they wanted to cross. So they negotiated. And when they saw Khidr alayhi salatu wasalam, they allowed him to come for free. They said, no, you just hop on and come for free. Now when Khidr alayhi salatu wasalam, when he got into the boat with Sayyidina Musa alayhi salatu wasalam, he broke a plank, a panel off the boat. So Sayyidina Musa alayhi salatu wasalam couldn't restrain himself. He said, these people, they take us for free on their boat, and you repay them by damaging their boat. So then Khidr alayhi salatu wasalam said, didn't I tell you that you won't be able to stay patient? So Musa alayhi salatu wasalam, he said, look, I apologize, this is my first mistake. Then after they got off, they walked, and then they came across a young boy. Sayyidina Khidr alayhi salatu wasalam killed the boy. Musa alayhi salatu wasalam couldn't contain himself. This is an innocent child, you killed him. So Sayyidina Khidr alayhi salatu wasalam said, didn't I tell you that you won't be able to stay patient? So then Musa alayhi salatu wasalam, he apologized and he said, look, this is the last time. If I interrupt you once again, I'll understand that we'll have to separate. Anyway, they carried on walking. They came to a village. And when they came to this village, being guests to the village, they requested the people of the village to entertain them as hosts. Now, these people were evil people, and they didn't. So these people didn't look after them as guests. Now, Khidr alayhi salatu wasalam, he came across a wall that was about to fall. So he began repairing the wall. Sayyidina Musa alayhi salatu wasalam couldn't contain himself. He said, these people, they refuse to entertain us, and now you go and repair their wall, and again without a wage. So Sayyidina Khidr alayhi salatu wasalam said, Musa, this is where we part, but I'll explain to you why I did what I did. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam says in hadith that only if Musa alayhi salatu wasalam had remained more patient, then we would have learned much more. And then Khidr alayhi salatu wasalam, he went to explain why he did what he did. He said, as for the boat, this is a tyrant king is coming, and he will confiscate all of these boats and ships. But this one, because it's damaged, because I've damaged it, he won't confiscate it. So that's why I did this. As for the young boy, he will be evil and he will grow to be a disbeliever. And not only will he grow to be a disbeliever, but he will take his parents into disbelief. So I killed him, and Allah will replace him. And Allah did. According to different narrations, we learn that he was replaced with a daughter who became the mother of a prophet, and according to another narration, a mother of 2 prophets. And as for this wall, yes, as you'd seen, the people of this village were evil. And this wall belongs in the land of 2 orphans. And underneath the wall, their father had buried some treasure for them. Now, if this wall breaks, then these people will take this gold and these orphans won't get to it. So I repaired it temporarily so that when they grow up, they can then retrieve these treasures. So this is what you were unable to remain patient over. And this is where Allah finishes speaking about this story. But again, so many lessons we learn, that Musa alayhi salatu wasalam and his thirst for knowledge, to learn, despite being a prophet of Allah, he wanted to, as soon as he heard that there was somebody who had some more knowledge than him, then he wanted to go and spend time with him and learn of him. SubhanAllah, when Musa alayhi salatu wasalam and Khidr alayhi salatu wasalam, when they sat on the boat, a bird perched itself at the end and pecked into the water. And Sayyidina Khidr alayhi salatu wasalam said to Musa alayhi salatu wasalam that time, that, "O Musa, you have knowledge and I have knowledge. I have knowledge of that which you have not been given, and you have knowledge that which I haven't been given. But then both of our knowledge combined, in comparison with the knowledge of Allah, is like the amount of water this bird took into its beak." With this story ended. Who was Khidr alayhi salatu wasalam? There's much said about him. Was he a prophet? The ulama do differ, but many of the ulama do say that he was a prophet. But he lived for a very long time. We learn from ahadith that even some of the Sahaba radiallahu anhum met him. We learn also that he was there during the time of Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam, as we learn in a short while. Furthermore, Allah doesn't mention anything else about Khidr alayhi salatu wasalam. His story ends pretty much here. Then, the other thing that the Makkans were asked to inquire from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was about the man who travelled the east and the west. Allah begins this section by saying, وَيَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنْ ذِي الْقَرْنَيْنِ, and they ask you about Dhul Qarnayn. Say, I shall now recite to you I shall now narrate to you about him. And then Allah says, we gave him power on earth and provided for him a way to everything. So he followed a way, meaning he travelled, until when he reached where the sun sets, he found it setting into a miry spring, and found near it a group of people. We said, O Dhul Qarnayn, either you punish or take something good for them. Dhul Qarnayn why was he named Dhul Qarnayn? Dhul Qarnayn meaning the one with the two horns. There are different narrations which suggest different things. One is that he had two curly locks of hair, therefore he was known as Dhul Qarnayn. Others said that because he ruled from the east to the west, that's why he was known as Dhul Qarnayn. We learn that he was, from the Quran as well as from the Hadith, we learn that he was a righteous and just king who ruled from the east to the west, and he conquered everything in between, and he ruled justly. And Allah had given him and blessed him. And Allah mentions here as well the different directions of his travel towards the east, towards the west, and then to the mountain range in the north. And then at the end, Allah mentions how he closed the pass between two mountains. Now, when was his time? Where was he from? The Quran itself doesn't mention this, but we learn from different... the ulama have done research, obviously, and looked into historical events to try and understand which time he was from. The one thing to point is that there's one narration that suggests that there were four kings who in their time, they rule the world. 2 of them were believers and 2 of them were disbelievers. The 2 believers were Sayyidina Sulaiman alayhi salatu wasalam, and the second one was this Dhul Qarnayn. And the 2 disbelievers were, one was Namrud, who was the king during the time of Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam, and the other was Nebuchadnezzar, who we spoke about yesterday. Now, some have often what happens when Dhul Qarnayn is mentioned, for some reason, the name Sikandar or Alexander is also mentioned. And some have wrongly said that the Alexander the Great, who's known as the Greek or the Macedonian, the son of Philip, his minister was Aristotle, and he killed Darius. They say that this was the same Dhul Qarnayn. However, this is wrong because the Quran says very clearly that Dhul Qarnayn was a pious servant of Allah, and this Alexander, he was a polytheist, he was a fire worshipper. Now, we also learn from different narrations that Dhul Qarnayn was actually there during the time of Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam. And his minister was actually, one of his ministers was Sayyidina Khidr alayhi salatu wasalam. And according to one narration, we understand that when he visited Makkah for Hajj, Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam came out to meet him, and he even advised him as well. So he is very different to Alexander the Great. Another opinion is that, if you remember when I mentioned that Bukhtanasar, he ransacked Bayt al-Maqdis and he looted the wealth from it. And then a Persian king restored Bayt al-Maqdis and gave Bayt al-Maqdis back to Banu Israel. According to some narrations, this was Dhul Qarnayn as well. But then that was just some ulama of that opinion. In any case, here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about his journeys. When he first travelled, Allah mentions حتى إذا بلغ مغرب الشمس وجدها تغرب في عين حمئة وجد عندها قوما, that when he reached where the sun sets, and again down there he found a group of people who were disbelievers, so he had the option of either punishing them or giving them an option. So he chose the latter and gave them an option. And then Allah mentions about how he travelled in the opposite direction, and then he made a similar choice, and then Allah mentions of how he reached the point where the 2 mountains was a pass between the 2 mountains. And what happened is there was a group of people there who were constantly pestered by another group who would come and trouble them, and these were the Ya'juj, Ma'juj, the Gog, Magog. So they requested Sayyidina Jibreel, they requested Dhul Qarnayn to close the pass so that these people couldn't come and harm them. So Dhul Qarnayn, he built a pass, and Allah mentions of how he built a wall so that they couldn't clamber over and so on. Now, this wall, again, the ulama have done research into where it is and so on. So many questions about where it is. Is it still there? Are the Ya'juj and Ma'juj, where are they? And so on. Allah knows best. The ulama have given different opinions, and those you can read in the books of tafsir, in the books of history, and so on. The Ya'juj and Ma'juj are a nation that Allah's Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam spoke about. There's hadith in some detail from Sayyidina Nawas ibn Sam'an radiyallahu anhu, and he says that once the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he mentioned Dajjal, and then he mentioned a few things which spoke about his physical appearance and how the Prophet ﷺ mentioned about his trial and that he will have Jannah and Jahannam with him. And some of the Sahaba radiallahu anhu say that this narration had gripped us with fear, and we felt as if he was lurking around somewhere near us. So when we mentioned, or when we presented ourselves in the evening, the Prophet ﷺ asked us, "What's wrong with you?" So we said that, "Oh, you spoke about Dajjal, and then you spoke about him. Some of the things you didn't speak in. Well, it seemed it wasn't much to worry about. Yet it was also there were also things that worried us, and we felt that it was almost as if he was lurking nearby." So the Prophet ﷺ said to them at that time that it's not this Dajjal, but there are many other trials that will come, and I fear these. And the Prophet ﷺ himself said that if he appears and I am amongst you, then I shall confront him personally. And then he spoke in detail about Dajjal and when he will emerge, and he spoke about Sayyidina Isa alayhi salatu wasalam's return to the dunya, and in other ahadith we learn about Imam Mahdi's arrival as well. So Imam Mahdi will come before the emergence of Dajjal, and then close to the time and the passing away of Imam Mahdi, about a few years before then, Dajjal will emerge, and that will be the time when Sayyidina Isa alayhi salatu wasalam will come also. And after the Dajjal is killed, then slightly a short time after that, the trial of Ya'juj and Ma'juj will take place, when they will be able to get through this pass that Dhul Qarnayn built. And Allah mentioned this here as well, that at a time when the promise of your Lord comes, then they will raise the wall to the ground. And then the Prophet ﷺ spoke about their fitna and how they will cause havoc on this earth. But then Isa alayhi salatu wasalam will pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then they will all be killed. And in the hadith we learn about how they will say that we have killed everyone on this world, and now let's kill those who are in the skies, and they will shoot their arrows towards the skies. The arrows will return with blood, and they will think that they have accomplished their mission. In any case, they will be destroyed, and then Allah will clean the land. And the hadith suggests that after this, the people will have prosperity, and it will be a good time. Believers will be all around. And then Allah, after this, when it will become very close to the time of the Day of Judgment, then the believers will pass away until on the land will only be the evil people. So all of these are mentioned in the hadith. I've just very quickly mentioned it as a very short summary. There's obviously a lot more detail to it, but this isn't the time or the place. With regards to the Ya'juj and Ma'juj, again, there are different opinions of the ulama, and the only reason I mention this is because obviously they're mentioned here. Some of the ulama have actually even said that their time has already passed, and they have referred to them as different groups of people, such as the Mongols or the Tartars and so on. But the majority of the ulama, they agree that their time is still to come, and they will come during the time of Sayyidina Isa alayhi salatu wassalam. With this, we finished Surah Al-Kahf. We then recited Surah Maryam. It's named after Maryam alayhi salatu wassalam. In this surah, Allah begins the surah by speaking about Sayyidina Zakaria alayhi salatu wassalam and how he was blessed with a child in old age after seeing the barakat that were placed before Maryam alayhi salatu wassalam. Then Allah speaks about the miraculous conception of Sayyidina Isa alayhi salatu wassalam and his birth, and how as people they questioned Maryam alayhi salatu wassalam, and how Isa alayhi salatu wassalam spoke from the cradle to prove the innocence of his mum. Allah also speaks about Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salatu wassalam and his conversation with his father when he said, Ya abati la ta'budu shaitan. Oh my father, do not worship the shaitan. His father, meaning Azar, is worship idols, and in fact create idols. Allah speaks about a number of the Anbiya alayhi salatu wassalam, mentions Musa alayhi salatu wassalam and his brother Harun alayhi salatu wassalam. He mentions Sayyidina Ismail, Sayyidina Idris. They're all mentioned here. Allah also mentions some scenes of the Day of Judgment. We then recited Surah Taha. Surah Taha deals mainly with the story of Sayyidina Musa alayhi salatu wassalam when he went to Mount Tur, and where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala addressed him and gave him the miracles and gave him the responsibility of and the role of addressing and calling Fir'aun to Allah. So, and then the story of Musa alayhi salatu wassalam is mentioned in some detail, along with when he went to receive the Torah from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and how his people rebelled and they took and began worshipping the Kahf, and these mentioned here. And then near to the end of Surah Taha, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about the Sayyidina Adam alayhi salatu wasalam again, and when Allah instructed the angels to prostrate before him, and Iblis's refusal. With that, we finish Surah Taha. May Allah give us all the ability to understand. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik, nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk.